Morning, everybody. This is a short video on how to properly fill out the non-hazardous waste profile, specifically the ERC Midwest profile. Of course, there are other profiles you could potentially be filling out for companies like Waste Management or Veolia or other disposal partners. They all follow a similar pattern, so it's once you get one of them down, you kind of get the idea, the feel for what these waste profiles are asking for. So I'm going to just go through the entire process of filling one of these out. Hopefully, for you that are visual learners, you can see how this is done. And of course, you'll always have something to refer back to if you have questions. And if there are questions that this video does not answer, then you can feel free to call me. This is Mike, by the way, Mike Altmeyer. Send me an email or call me on the phone, and I can always help you out with questions you have. So looking at our profile, it's 2 pages long. Really, the first page is the most time consuming and asks the most questions. Page 2 is pretty simple. But what you need to know before you start filling this out is that with any waste stream, you're going to need to know some pretty specific information about it. That information is going to come from either a sample that was taken and analyzed by a laboratory, generator knowledge, or STS sheets would be the other example, or other information source. One thing about STS sheets, you don't always have the benefit of having an STS sheet, especially with bulk loads. So more than likely we'll be relying on a sample ahead of time that our laboratory looks at and checks for hazard characteristics and so on. So let's take, for example, a waste stream that we pick up from a client in bulk. It's going to be pumped onto a tanker. So, either a wastewater or oily wastewater type of material. We'll take that as our example for how we're going to fill out this profile, okay? And we're going to also assume that we've gotten a sample ahead of time and our laboratory has looked at it and confirmed that it's okay to treat. So starting with page 1 of this profile, what we would do for a bulk shipment is check the box for wastewater treatment. Could also be used oil management, and used oil has its own set of rules for what you consider a used oil. Generally, if oil constitutes a certain percentage of the fluid, then the waste stream gets managed as used oil. We're going to just go with wastewater treatment to keep this simple. And that's one of those questions where if you're not sure whether a waste stream would be managed as used oil, you can give me a call or give Zach Marlin a call. All right, so we're going to assume that generator name is ERC Midwest LLC. Again, just to make this simple, we'll put our address in for the treatment plant. And you want to make sure everything is filled in, that there are no blank spots. So all the way down to the zip code. Contact name, I'll just put my own name. Phone number. You get the idea. I'm just going through all these steps so that you understand, the importance of being thorough. Our EPA ID number. Now here's where I'll show you how to get that if you're not sure what the EPA ID number is. So the Wisconsin DNR has a database called SHWIMS, which is an acronym for something I'm not sure what it stands for. You can go to SHWIMS and search by facility name for an EPA ID number. So I'll put our facility name in there. With this, just as an FYI, less is more. You don't want to put too much detail in here because if you have any spelling errors or punctuation that you didn't intend to put in there, it will show no search result. So kind of want to do a minimal type of search here. Okay, and so we have the search result is either West Allis or Butler. Well, in our case, we want to ship this to West Allis. And there you have your EPA ID number. Okay, so copy that. Paste it into our waste profile. And we're good to go. The customer name here, this is really the billing information. So in many cases, in most cases, the customer name is the same as the generator name. If you're working with a broker, you might have a different scenario there where if we're going to bill the broker for disposal, then you would put the broker's information on this side. The common name of waste, we could just, this is not a technical term for common name. You just come up with a decent description of the actual material itself. So let's say pit water, just using a very generic example. Is the waste wet or dry? It's wet. US DOT proper shipping name. I typically go with non-regulated liquid. You could also say non-regulated solid. You could also say non-regulated material. When we're dealing with non-hazardous wastes, there is no set description for the waste itself. You only get into actual shipping descriptions that are particular when you're talking about hazardous waste. So we have some leeway with how we describe with the DOT proper shipping name. Process generating the waste. I'm just going to say rinsing of equipment. So again, this is going to be case by case, very specific to the type of waste and the process generating that you're theoretically dealing with. So I'm just using a generic example here. Number 4, is this waste characteristic or listed waste as defined in CFR 40 Part 261? We cannot accept hazardous waste, so this always has to be checked no. Assuming that is the case, if you would check this yes, then you should stop filling out the profile right at this point and go to a hazardous waste profile through Tredebi or whatever hazardous waste outlet you can use. Is this waste a used oil or contain used oil as defined in 40 CFR 279? Again, if you need help with that, give us a call, either Zach or myself, and we can talk you through that. I'm just going to say for my profile, no, it's not a used oil. The method of shipment would be tanker in this case. And then you don't have to fill out any of this. If you have non-bulk waste in drums and so on, then you would mark drum, the type and size, 55 gallon, 30 gallon, whatever you have. Frequency of shipment, we'll say this one is monthly. And then the amount of shipment, well, one tanker load would be about 5,000 gallons. Okay, you could also express this in pounds, but for liquid, of course, it's just a little bit easier to express it in gallons. Waste is, we'll call industrial process waste. This is an easy one to miss over here. NRC radioactive, yes or no? You want to check no to that, unless you know something about the waste being radioactive, and that, in which case, again, our facilities cannot accept NRC radioactive waste. So if you have to mark that yes for any reason, which is unlikely, but if you did, we would not be able to accept that. MSDS attached, we're going to say no, because for most bulk loads, you won't have the benefit of having an SDS or MSDS. Analysis attached, you might have that, or you could say if the laboratory has already performed analysis on the sample, then of course you do have analysis. Okay. Just scroll down a little bit to section C. Physical data, we'll say this is clear color. Is it pumpable? Yes. Is it pourable? No. Again, this is a question for, or this section is geared towards both bulk and non-bulk. So that's why the pourable question is maybe if it was in drums, it could be pourable. Odor, we'll say it has a mild odor. flash point. This is something the laboratory can tell you with most bulk waste streams, unless there's a layer of fuel or something on top and it's stratified, you won't have a flash point that's going to matter, or you won't have a flash point at all. Now, the cutoff here for whether a waste is hazardous or non-hazardous is 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So for flash point, I'm just going to say over 200 F, because a liquid that does not flash or has a very high flash point, this would define what is a non-regulated material. BOD, this is only going to be, can only be derived by analytical. So I don't really know. I'll put zeros in here. This is typically how I would fill this out, because I don't have BOD or COD in my theoretical waste stream, but a laboratory would be able to tell you that. Number of layers, 1, liquid, 100%. The pH, you can probably get an exact pH on this load if you've had it tested. Otherwise, you can put a range of 4 to 10, and that's usually considered the range for non-hazardous. The entire range is on the low end 2, and on the high end 12.5. So we can accept liquids anywhere in between those two parameters. But generally speaking, most liquids would fall into this 4 to 10 non-hazardous range. And continue to fill out the physical data. If you have 100% liquid, then you have 0% solids and 0% sludge. If this is not reflective of your waste stream, then you'll have to manipulate those numbers so that it is. And if there is a layer of sludge, then so be it. It would just maybe change the type of treatment that we're going to be able to do on it. Specific gravity, this is the density of the liquid. So if it's water or mostly water, the specific gravity is always going to be around 1. Does the waste contain mercury? No. Does it contain ammonia? No. Phenol? No. Again, if your analytical data says differently, then you'll have to change these numbers. Cyanide and PCBs would be, if you had to mark yes to either one of these, more than likely we can't accept that waste for a hazard, because they have hazardous characteristics. So waste composition, this is important to understand how this section needs to be filled out. What you'll do with this is you need to lay out the constituents that are part of the waste and make sure that at the end they total 100%. Okay, so that's really important. If you have water, mostly water, you might say this is 98% water, and let's say oil is 2% or less. Again, just using this as an example. Maybe since I'm not exactly sure what composition oil needs to be at for it to be managed as used oil, I'll say 1% oil and 99% water, and just assume that we could wastewater treat that. Is the sample provided? Yes, because in most cases, like I say, for bulk, we will have a sample ahead of time, and you can put the date collected, time collected, sample by sample location. Most samples are going to be either a grab or a composite sample. So composite sample means you took multiple samples and put them into one sample container. A grab sample is just one container per tank, let's say. So if you had a series of tanks, you could take a Kalawasa sample of each and combine them all into one container, assuming they're all relatively similar in their properties. If they're different, then you want to take a different grab sample from each tank. Okay, so now that we've got page 1 completed, we go down to page 2. And what this is asking in section E is, do you have any of these constituents, inorganic or organic, that are over the regulated limit? So what you see here is the waste code for arsenic, barium, cadmium, and all these other constituents, and the actual limit for, these are T-clip limits for acceptance into our plants. So you have to check each box to confirm that all these are below regulatory limits. So we can, in other words, we could accept waste with very small amounts of arsenic or barium, but they must be below these limits. So you'll end up just checking each of these boxes. Again, if your analytical says differently, and you do have any constituent over that level, then we cannot accept that, and it will get rejected. Okay, so just going to check all these boxes. And this just confirms again that we don't have any toxicity in our waste. These are all constituents that would indicate there is some toxic component. So we want to say it's non-toxic. Used oil warranty, in this case, I'm going to mark not applicable because I'm declaring this a wastewater waste stream, not a used oil waste stream. Now, if you did have to mark this or fill this section out because you are handling you are bringing in the used oil, then the questions here, you have to answer them all. Has this used oil been mixed with hazardous waste? Yes or no? So in order to determine this, I mean, this is not something that you would just know right off the top of your head. We look at the oil and do a ChlorDetect test on it. And that is going to measure the level of halogens that are emulsified in the oil. So if you have halogens over 1,000 parts per million, which is what this question asks here, then you do have to mark yes. Okay, so if you had that, that used oil is considered a hazardous waste. Again, we wouldn't be able to accept it if it had 1,000 parts per million halogens or greater. If you do the ChlorDetect and it comes up less than 1,000 parts, then you just mark this box no. And then you can also mark no to this question, has it been mixed with hazardous waste? So that's what we call the used oil warranty. You're just essentially certifying that the waste has not been mixed with hazardous waste. Okay, if you had a result that was over 1,000 parts per million here, you could then take it down to this next section 3 here and say that if you had to mark yes, can you rebut this presumption that used oil is a hazardous waste? Yes or no? Rebutting the presumption is a complicated process. That's something that, again, we would need certified laboratory analysis to do. So that's a question to either Zach or myself about what's the next steps here. So when you get through all that, and you're down to the warranty statement, and you're done with your part, if you're ERC staff, this is the end for you. This is where you send this out now by email to the generator, asking them to initial, print here, sign, and title and date this profile. So what they're doing is essentially taking credit for all the work that we just did to fill this out. So you're doing this on their behalf and they're certifying that everything is accurate. So important step, make sure that we are never, as it says here, never signing these profiles ourselves. You would never want to do that if you're in a position of not being the generator. I mean, we're essentially taking ownership of the generator's waste if we were to do that, to sign this profile on their behalf, and we never want to do that. So this always has to be signed by the generator themselves. So once the profile gets signed and sent back to you, you can submit it to Zach Marlin for approval. If you have supporting data like analytical, like an SDS sheet, send that along with the profile to Zach so that he can get a clear picture of what he's dealing with here. The profile is good, but it's not always the whole story. So he may want to know other things like how maybe more details on how the waste was generated, or what other materials are stored at this facility that may be integrated with the process and so on. So any supporting data that you can send to Zach with the actual profile itself after it's been signed would be very helpful. So that is essentially it for filling out the ERC non-hazardous waste profile. Generally speaking, approval happens fairly quickly if you have all the data that you need to send. The less you leave blank, the better. So as you can see here, I actually did leave this blank here as far as which facility this is going to. So you want to make sure that's also checked. Again, if you complete this process and you have any questions, give me a call or give Zach a call. That is all I have.